Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. On the news front for EVE, we don't have a lot. We did get a mass test last week and I was there. Didn't make a full recording of that because, well, there were a lot of problems, which, well, ironically is very good because it means that CCP can spot problems before they hit DQ. But yeah, this mass test was all about the graphics DirectX 12 update and it was full of problems. Basically, whenever you would do something like this, zoom a little bit, it became a complete slideshow. Getting on grid, leaving grid was really terrible. Even jumping through the gate with a few hundred chips on the gate was really bad. And so, yeah, not exactly the best mass test from the experience point of view, but even during the test, CCP already said that, yeah, we get the same thing on our end and we get a good idea as to what the problem is. And so they'll be able to, I think, improve that quite dramatically thanks to the mass test, which is, of course, the whole point. But yeah, it was kind of hard. All you could do was basically zoom out to the max and then stay there. Don't touch your camera in order to be able to basically not disconnect and problems like that. Next quick little item is that there should be a sale happening on the New Eden store as well, which I think will have an impact on the market, and you may already have spotted that on Plex. So let's get into the New Eden store here and see what's happening. Yep, there we go. There's a sale happening for Omega, 20% off. So 1 month Omega is 400 Plex, 12 month Omega is 4,800 Plex, which is actually the exact same discount. So you could do the same on 6 months or whatever. But this should mean a lot of extra demand for Plex in the market itself, which should of course also mean higher prices. Not spotting anything other than that, at least here in the shipskins tab. So for the services, it's that. Apparel, there's a bundle. Still the Elite XIX skin for 2000 Plex. All right, and then on the shipskins, also the same bundle, but nothing to report in sales. But yeah, an important sale happening at the moment, which is of course the Omega time for 20% less Plex. Now let's take a look at the market itself. As always, we start with pilot services coming in at 230. Like that, let's get on that Plex chart and let's start, not groups, but with the chart itself. There we go. And you can see the massive rebound on the increased volumes, which is purely demand driven, as of course CCP gives us a lot more for the Plex that we give back to them basically. So you're taking stuff out of the game, and as a result we're basically back at the same high point we reached before we started a slow decline, which in my opinion is starting to be due to lower activity, summer slump and things like that. So the current prices for Plex are almost 3.9 million for the sellers in GDAV 4, 3.7 and above for the buyers. They have been forced up quite substantially, and then we have, well, no big change when it comes to the buyers in the player-owned trade hubs, and we're still just below 3.9 million for the buyers in the Tranquility Trading Tower as well. So overall, very expensive Plex, of course, 1 year high point. I do think that we've got a little bit of like a sideways movement and then to a slow decline that's on the books if indeed a summer slump happens. Again, all of that depends on what CCP's plans are over the summer. Historically speaking, it's always been a pretty quiet time because, well, summer holidays in Iceland, where the sun really doesn't shine very much except at the peak of the summer, is very important to them. So don't expect massive updates, but on the other hand, if they want to, you know, keep activity up a little bit, they'll have to do something. So we will see, of course, what happens there. But my expectation, as I've said, is that this could actually be a nice time to sell before the summer. Then we've got the multiple pilot train certificate that is, you know, on that slowish decline, went well above 1.5 billion and is now edging just below that. Still above 1.5 billion for the sellers, almost 1.5 billion for the buyers, so pretty damn narrow margin. And here we do have, well, a market where it's not just the sellers that are dominating, but a little bit of both is happening, which means, in my opinion, that hesitation, the market isn't sure exactly where the price should go, as again there are competing forces out there like the summertime that's coming, but also, well, the the potential developments that CCP will at some point have to come out with cool dev blocks and things like that, if they want to get some of that FanFest stuff out this year. Then we have the skill extractors next. Back up as well. I think they have a very strong correlation with Plex, and so they have no choice but to follow up on that Plex sale, or that Omega time sale I should say. 434 million for the sellers and 408 for the buyers. So again, very expensive. 435, yeah, probably close to that 1 year high point yet again. Impact on the injectors, let's take a look at that. Here are the large scale injectors that, you know, have started to settle down at a 1 year high point just below 750 million ISK. We're talking 740 for the first seller, 745 for the buyers, for the next one, and then the buyers are above 700 million for a large scale injector. I think same story. You know, under the increased Plex pressure from the increased price of Plex, of course, those prices start to go up as well. But eventually, we are starting to see that slowdown come through here as well, and so we're hesitating, starting to move sideways. I would not be surprised if Plex actually starts to make a similar type of chart. Then we've got these small scale injectors, always a little bit more volatile, not able to maintain that peak price of almost 160 million ISK, but actually having to give back a little bit of ground, down to 150 for the sellers and 135 for the buyers. Also a little bit more margin, so a little bit more action on that small scale injector market. Might be slightly tradable, but it is of course very risky, as in my opinion again, demand is due to come down a little bit. Daily alpha injectors next. Very sharp bounce after a CCP sale brought the price below 40 million ISK. We basically have higher volumes at the moment, and we're right back towards that 45 million, which is actually already decently expensive. I would say 45 million for the sellers, 41 million for the buyers. So this is going to be interesting to see as well. I do think we have spotted a pattern here that says that when daily alpha injectors go above 50 million, CCP is willing to intervene on that market in order to keep the price of daily alpha injectors in check, so that you have this hook for alpha players to come back to with a daily goal of around between 40 and 50 million ISK. That's what we're seeing happen here twice, but you know, in correlation with real life. Is it possible that once the market spots this, and that in fact there is more demand for daily alpha injectors than there is supply, and thus higher prices are actually the norm, that the players base starts to learn from this pattern, and that eventually CCP will have to intervene more and more and more in order to keep the daily alpha injectors within their you know, the price range that they want. That could be very interesting, and could have you know, very interesting correlations with what, for instance, happens with real life markets as well, where you could say central banks are trying to not keep the price of daily alpha injectors in check, but keep rates in check. But eventually the market always comes through, and so this is an opportunity, right, where eventually, if CCP really wants to do that, they might just have to lower the real life cost of daily alpha injectors in order to keep it below 50 million ISK. We'll see, of course, how all of that evolves, but this is clearly a double intervention here by our CCP overlords on the daily alpha injectors at a 50 million range. It's going to be interesting to see if this becomes a pattern, and if this then becomes an accelerating pattern, which is honestly what I would expect, because then you have something that becomes predictable. The market can push that to 50 million and then get cheaper daily alpha injectors through a sale flowing into the market again and again. So we will see. Then we've got the hypercores next, that max price at 450,000. Is that correct, or is that today's daily bug again? 424,000 for the sellers, 390 for the buyers. So still very, very expensive, and actually a little bit of an increased price here as well. I think also under pressure from what's happening with Plex themselves, and so the hypercores are up a little bit, with my personal expectation of sideways movements after this. But we will see in the upcoming weeks, and especially months. I'm curious to see for the summer months what's going to happen, but for now, yeah, we're in very expensive pilot services territory. Next up, we've got the minerals, 945. Quick drink first. There we go, and let's as always start with titanium. That's losing ground again and is now getting close to a 1-year low point. Not good news. I thought we would be able to hold on a little bit better than what we are doing, but sellers are coming in pretty aggressively, especially in Jita here, 369, but even 360 and 365 in the Tranquility refinery, not the trading tower. So 369 for the sellers and 354 for the buyers. It is a pretty narrow margin. I wonder if we'll push through the 350 barrier. There is like 1 billion units of demand here that's waiting to keep that from happening. But who knows, with enough supply and enough dumping, that might be on the books. At least it's right, the first 4 sell orders still above 350, and then we're talking 312 in very small volumes, so we gotta be a little bit careful here. Clearly we're oversupplied, and this could have several reasons. One thing that I've honestly found quite often during summertime when activities would slow down is that miners, PI guys, those guys tend to stick around. They tend to just keep going on their daily routines, which of course tends to crash prices over the summer. It's more the PvPers, the larger alliance and things like that, where those breaks have a very big impact, but more solo-minded players actually tend to stick around, and so we could be in a serious oversupply situation if that keeps going. Let's see if the other Isaac minerals are showing something similar. Pyrite, well, I would say you can see maybe at the tail end that the 5-day moving average is now going below the 20-day moving average, so clearly a little bit of pressure is starting to mount here as well. 893 for the sellers, 851 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, but I would say that pressure might be starting to mount here as well. And then Mexalon is, well, at the tail end again. Look at that, 5-day moving average clearly below the 20-day moving average, and then today's average already showing signs of going down, trying to head below 60. Almost 61 at 60.65 for the sellers and 58.57 for the buyers. So a little bit more pressure could push us below 60 ISK for the average prices quite easily. Yeah, Isaac minerals, I think that we are going to see a little bit of pressure, and honestly I would not be surprised if, despite potential lower activity over the summer, that one of those activities that will actually remain relatively high is gonna be Isaac mining. It becomes a very easy habit to just keep going. Then for LOSEC we've got Isogen. I would expect the exact reverse happening here, and that's what we are at least seeing here for Isogen. That's pushing to 400 ISK, which I would say is normal. It tends to be the more routine and relatively safe, right? Nothing is completely safe in EVE, but relatively safe activities that stick around over the summer periods. And so going into LOSEC for mining is, for instance, something that'll probably be risked a lot less. And for Isogen, this means 401 ISK for the sellers, 378 for the buyers. So another leg up. We'll see if 400 is defendable. For those sellers, perhaps some supplies are out there. Some players see this 400 price and say, all right, I still have some of that old Isogen. I'm going to start dumping because this is the price where I'm willing to really sell at. I think that is possible. We clearly see that from the start of the year, where we've basically gone straight up to that 300 mark. Once we went on the 350 though, that dynamic is starting to change here, where supplies can actually bring prices down for a little bit, but the overall trend is still unbroken. And I have to drink again, sorry about that. But there we go. So Isogen back on the uptrend, and sellers at 400 ISK. Let's see if this means that Noxium is doing the same thing. Not just yet, although on some daily averages we are trying to get a little bit higher, and then at the tail end we're going back down substantially. Sellers are coming in at 1100 ISK and buyers at 1055. Very narrow margin and not that much of an upside potential right now, although again, same thing could happen if it's Isaac minerals that maintain their supply, but LOSEC ones start to go down, then we could be seeing higher prices. But right now, no, Noxium still holding on, and as Isogen, I would say that this increased price for Isogen is due to still those reserves that are starting to really dry up. And active demand, active supply for Isogen should dictate higher prices. Then for Nelsec, you may already have seen that on the ticker as well, but Megasite going up substantially. And what's Zydrine doing? It's trying as well. A little bit of a double top forming, but heading for another 1-year high point. 1300 ISK for the sellers, 1340 pretty quickly. And then 1200 for the buyers. So it's Nelsec minerals that are becoming far more expensive. And to me, that's definitely kind of interesting that despite all resources having doubled in availability, the major difference between Nelsec, Lowsec, or the differences I should say between Nelsec, Lowsec and Highsec are very, very clear here, with at the moment Nelsec minerals being very difficult to obtain in Highsec and being very expensive, because Megasite is doing something quite similar, but in fact is doing not a double top but a second breakout well above 1250, going for 1380 for the sellers and almost 1300 ISK for the buyers, really re-establishing that old truism that Megasite is more expensive than Zydrine, because it's actually a little bit harder to get with lower volumes in the ores that you mine, at least normally. So there we go, Megasite is back as king of the Tech 1 minerals, more expensive than Noxium. Even Zydrine has got Noxium yet again. I do think how long that will remain the case, though. I think that honestly Noxium supplies could dry out and could basically become a contender for going up as well on lower activity, which will make Lowsec, in my opinion, even more risky and something that will be done less. Then finally we've got the Morphite market that's super stable and flat at the current rate. 42,760 for the sellers, 40,300 for the buyers, so pretty narrow margin on this one. My read on this is, well, Morphite is being mined and will remain to be mined to its maximum potential. If there's one mineral that you're focusing on whenever it and wherever it becomes available, it is Morphite, and that means that we actually can expect relatively stable supplies for this one, and thus a relatively stable price as well. Then the PI market, that's coming in at 1705. Like that. And well, with summertime coming, honestly I don't expect good news here. As I've said, PI pretty passive, and just like with Highsec, mining tends to be something that can actually maintain pretty high levels of activities even with lower general activities in the game, and broadcast nodes are starting to pay the price here, going well below 1.5 million, not able to break out of that. 1.45 million for the sellers, almost 1.4 million for the buyers, but clearly giving up some of those gains at the moment. Construction blocks then also doing a little bit of a slump, back below 8,000 disks, so that must be some pretty serious supply that came in to crash the price. 7,900 for the sellers, 7,000 for the buyers. No, it's actually probably a demand side thing, which is in line with what I was explaining. Supplies can maintain themselves, but lower activity means lower demand, and thus you see these lower prices being really pulled down by those buyers that have gone to 7,000 disk. Even Coolants has its inflection point at the moment, tried to get back to 10,000 disk, but is starting to lose ground on that as well. 8.5 now for the sellers, 8,200 for the buyers. Then we get enriched uranium also cresting after getting back above 10,000 disk, but is already starting to slump. 10,280 to 9,600, and again, so this is all of the supply and these are the buyers. I do think that we are getting ready. Or maybe I should do it like this, just to see what's happening around here as well. Oh, that's a little bit better. Look at that with the Tranquility Trading Tower. Although the volumes are not that high, there is some demand there as well. So enriched uranium doing a little bit better, and also a little bit better in price. But let's keep going here. Integrity response drones, we do have our one exception. Advanced PI material, the big winner of the Siege Green update, is really able to maintain that high price. 2.7 million for the sellers, 2.6 for the buyers. Super expensive basically compared to all the others. Mechanical parts staying below 10,000 ISK, clearly starting to hesitate here in my opinion. 10.5 to 9.4. Miniature electronics still a slight upswing, so that's still well above average and well above 10,000 ISK as well. On a lack of supply, still a lack of supply. Almost 11,000 for the sellers, 9.3 for for the buyers though, look at that margin. That's really large. I would not be surprised that we will see a slump in this pretty soon on some supplies. Then we've got nano factories. All right, not great, not terrible. 1 million for the sellers. That's actually pretty impressive, but also 800,000 for the buyers. That's a 20% margin between sellers and buyers. That's quite significant. So again, supplies can very quickly bring those prices back down, in my opinion. Organic motor applicators, same story. 660 to 650, that's really not that great a price. Recursive computing modules basically was done about 2 weeks ago to the 1 year low point, recovered a little bit from that, but is already stalling, just over 1 million for both sellers and buyers. Robotics going back below 70,000. This gone a couple of days. 71,700 for the sellers, but 66,800 for the buyers. Again, margin opening up right there. Rocket fuels between 10 and 11 still doing quite well. 10,500 to 10,000 for the buyers. Self-harmonizing power cores still able to stay above 2 million, but only just 2.1 for the sellers, but below 1.9 million for the buyers. It's really the buyers that are starting to be drained out of these markets, so be careful. This could actually really still be, like, in my opinion, one of your final chances to be selling some of your PI at these really good prices. I think we're set up here for a difficult summer. Smart fab units pretty average at 60k, 67 to 49. Again, look at that margin, it's quite substantial. Sterile conduits starting to actually go back up a little bit, but from a well below average range, 935 to 850. Supercomputers next, 75,000, able to stay at a decent price. 80k to 71k is also pretty decent margin. Our synthetic oils are 9,000 for the sellers, 84 for the buyers, quite okay. Synthetic synapses, 78 to 73, pretty narrow margin actually compared to everything else that we're seeing. But here, for instance, transcranial microcontrollers starting to break down well below 75,000 as well. 70,000 for the sellers and 62,000, almost 63 for the buyers. But again, I think you're starting to feel here that it's the demand side problem, and does that those new supplies are basically forced down and down and down and down to those lower prices. Water-cooled CPU trying to defend 5k, not succeeding, 4.9 to 4.5, so super inexpensive refined PI material. And then we get our wetware mainframes that doing a bit of counter move as well, going towards the high end of its range, 1.7 million to 1.4 million though, so it's really sellers that are at a high price, but the buyers are not budging at all from that below 1.5 million price range for them, probably expecting what could be down the pipeline, which is a lot of supply for less demand. So that's really my read on the market. It's not there yet, right? We are still early June after all. But my read is that here and there you can see that it's demand that's starting to lower, and supplies can very easily, in my opinion, maintain high rates, and as a result we should see lower prices over the summer. Again, these are my expectations, don't take this as truth. I could be completely wrong on that, especially if CCP, for instance, comes out with some faction warfare structure stuff that requires PI all of a sudden. That could completely change the whole dynamic, but at the moment, yeah, we're looking at pretty expensive pilot services, but I think we'll start to slow down there, and then potentially I think lower prices for PI. Next are the advanced moon materials, coming in at 2340. Okay, that's a pretty fast one, but let's get started. Here are the carbides, crystalline carbonites, and the trend from last week is back, and we are at a 1 year low point below 100 disc for crystalline carbonite, 94 for the sellers and 86 for the buyers. Sort of my warning here again on this upswing that you got to be careful investing on these bottoms at the moment. When it comes to Tech 2, you might just be catching a falling knife, because not only is there way too much supply because of all of the moon mining that's happening with its double potential, but we're also probably starting to see lower demand as well, and we could really test new lows, as we're doing right here with buyers well below 90 ISK for crystalline carbonite. Then we've got for Caldari titanium carbide that's landing on a 100 disc, really trying to defend that super clearly in the last week or so. 107 for the sellers and buyers at 99.84, so just below that 100 disc. And in order to get these average prices, well, a lot of selling to those buyers has to happen as well. So the pressure is still on, but titanium carbide not willing to go below 100 disc just yet. For Fernite carbide for Minmatar, we are breaking down. We're now below 100, probably for the sellers as well. Yep, 96 to 92. And then for tungsten carbide for Amar, landing on 100 with a couple of daily averages below 100 disc, so 104 to 94. Buyers really below 100 disc on most of these. Because, well, it's again a demand side issue that's starting to pop up here as well. For the metamaterials, we start with Galente, of course, photonic metamaterials. Yeah, well below 7.5 yet again, I think. 7.5, almost 7.6 for the sellers, 7,200 for the buyers. And in order to get like these averages for the last couple of days, people are still selling to these buyers as well. So the margin is still pretty narrow, but the pressure is quite clearly there. And the supply side pressure. And then for Caldari, it's nonlinear metamaterials. That's, well, not at the 1 year low point, but look at these daily averages, just going straight down below 12,500. 12.4 for the sellers, 9.8 for the buyers. Anything that's a little bit more expensive than the rest, and there's that demand side gap that's starting to form as well. Then we've got Minmatar with plasmonic metamaterials, also, you know, not a 1 year low point, went below 10,000 disc, but the pressure is mounting. Sellers 11.2, buyers 11.1. All right, a little bit more of a closed gap here. We'll see which side wins out next, but my expectation, pressure is everywhere in this category. Terahertz metamaterials basically flat as well after going below 10,000 ISK. 11.3 to 11.290, so that's as close a margin as it gets. With, again, that's the question that you have to ask yourself. Do you think that there's more supplies that are going to keep coming, or is there enough demand to actually bring prices up? My expectation, prices will continue to go down. So a little bit of hesitation in some of these metamaterials, but let's take a look at the other advanced materials to try and get a bit of an idea for the segment in general. Fermionic condensates continuing to go down slowly, but again, not at the 1 year low point. That was close to 40,000 disc, 42.6 to 42,000. So maybe slightly more demand now, maybe a little bit of investment defense happening here as well, or maybe investors willing to go, all right, you know what, we set that price, so I'm actually going to put up some decent buy orders. As much as I can pick up at this price, it's great for me. And that could be what's going to keep things in check, but will their wallets be deep enough with potentially a summer slump coming? I'm not sure. Then we got Ferrogel trying to get back below 20k here as well, 20 above for the sellers and less than 19,000 for the buyers. So here I would say that if anyone came in and said, yeah, well, actually here my buy price probably that low point, 18k, so we're gonna test that again, but will there be enough demand this time for another big purchase? We will see. Then we get Fuller rides right back down, tried to go from 400 to 600, and then supply just brings us right back down towards that 400 yet again. 450 for the sellers, 430 for the buyers. Hypersynaptic fibers, same pattern. I think we can go over these a little bit more quickly. Nano transistors below 2.5, yeah, well below 2.5 for the sellers, 2,260 for the buyers, so 1 year low point on that one. Then we've got our phenolic composites, another 1 year low point, slow burn down to 900 for the sellers, 864 for the buyers. So yeah, if you bought here at 1,000, or if you bought here at, what's that gonna be, 940, all falling knives that have been got by these volumes and these volumes. Pressurized oxidizers back under pressure as well. I mean, it's really the same story. Reinforced carbon fibers going back towards 7.5, 7.6 to 7.1. Ceramic fibers finally also seeing the pressure yet again. So we do have some investments that happen, I think, that are actually driving some demand and keeping prices in check. But I think the supply side problem is this is going to be too big, and with lower activity, I think that demand side will start to shrink as well, and we could test new lows. That's my theory for advanced movements. Let's see what's happening in Take-Two ships, of course, as well, but I don't think we got any good news there. So Take-Two ships coming in at 29.45. Let's see what's happening here. The Basilisk is back below 130 million, so clearly starting to move in that new range, and relatively little volatility, in my opinion, not enough to trade on. 124 to 125 for the sellers, 115 for the buyers of a logistics cruiser. Then we get the Cerberus, also below 150 quite substantially, 143 to 136, so very cheap, and look at the lack of volatility and clearly the new range. Then we get the Curse, went up a little bit, but supply side coming right back, went above 150, sellers are now back at 140, and a few buyers that are here coming in at 130 million. Damnation at the moment up a little bit, but again the new range, it seems to be below 300 million, 292 to 254 for the buyers, so very big gap. And yeah, volume wise difficult to trade in my opinion. Might have enough up and down potential because it's such an expensive ship to do trading in, but then again, with 10 a day, how are you gonna make it happen? Very difficult. Then we've got the Deacon starting to see the pressure mount yet again as well. Not yet below 15 million, but 16.4 for the sellers, just above 15 for the buyers. Then the Eagle went above 150. We should see pressure mount on that soon, I think, 155 to 147. So one of the slightly better cruisers. Then we get the EOS back below 300 million very quickly as well, 272 to 245. Aries seeing pressure back, not yet below 37.5 million, but 43 million to 38.5. So it's basically the same story. We're not at the 1 year low point for most of these just yet, but pressure is going to continue to mount. And then again, it's your expectations. You think that we'll see more demand over the summer or less demand over the summer. I think that will really potentially bring us to even lower price ranges. Flycatcher going for 41 to 39. So again, compared to 70 at the start of the year, huge losses in value there, or huge increases in affordability, of course. Depends on where you come from. Guardian 130 yet again, yeah, 129 in fact for the sellers, 120 for the buyers. And just look at again that lowering volatility and that new range around 130. It's pretty obvious that that's what's happening. Then we get the Heretic starting to go flat at the current range just above 35 million, and yet pressure mounts yet again, 36 to 32 million for these. And here, so you get the sellers, that's the availability, and these are the buyers, which yeah, is not a lot. Then we get the Hound staying well below 20 million, in fact very close to 1 year low point, with sellers at 16 million, buyers at 15.4 million. That's pretty damn cheap if you're looking for an opportunity, right? We've seen now once, twice, where you managed to buy, let's say, close to 15 and then sell at 20. But again, same warning, you can clearly see the trend for the high points that's starting to point down and down, and thus the willingness of buyers to go above 20 million is starting to be lower and lower, and as a result I think it's not going to get any better over the summer. Then we get the Iquitursa, yeah, pretty difficult to read chart, but 1 year low point I think pretty close to that, with sellers below 550, 540 million for the sellers, 527 for the buyers. Very interesting, right? If you're looking for that investment, I mean, you get 25 a day, it's not so bad. It's a little bit different from the rest of the Take-Two ships because it is Triglavian and you get a pronounced 1 year low point. Might be something worth looking into. Then we get, I know that it's gonna be part of a meta, I'm pretty sure, because yeah, Triglavian ships are super powerful for like siege things, and I think going after bigger targets. So there's gotta be potentially an LC group out there that's gonna try to grab a cheap fleet of Iquitursas, and that could be your chance to then sell higher. For the Ishtar though, no such luck, heading for 130 million, 133 to 125. That's pretty damn cheap. Then we've got the Kirin. Actually, at the moment, going back up a little bit, went to 15 million. It's 1 year low point, so recovering from that. But look at those buyers. They're still staying on that 50 million point, camping right there. 19 million to 15 million. So again, it's in these smaller ships. I do think where buying the bottom and then trying to sell at a higher price is still possible and profitable. You get probably 30 a day or something like that. So 1 or 2 Kirins, buy at 15, sell at 18, 19. It is possible, but you got to be careful for those lower highs. Then we get the Manticore, which is staying below 20 million, not able to break out from that anymore. 17.4 for the first seller. Now that's going to be one of those mistakes over too high volume, I think, at that price. But 19 million for the sellers and almost 17 for the buyers. Pretty cheap, of course. On the 1 year chart, Nemesis, let's see, slightly cresting, but those minimum prices below 12.5. Yeah, 12.4 for the buyers, 14.4 for the sellers. Super cheap, of course. But yeah, no one's there to take advantage of that, I think. Nighthawk, 1 year low point, well below 300 million, 270 for 247, and I said it last week as well. But this is my where I've got a little bit of interesting, where I find some interesting, because it's a command ship, which is not usually something that you would buy for like PvE activities and things like that. But when it goes from 600 million and you can now buy one for 270, then it starts to be a little bit more interesting to see what you can get out of that hull, maybe boosting yourself and things like that. So overall, some of these might be opportunities for you to try some crazy stuff with some of these Tech 2 ships. Then we get the Oneros back at 100 million, 102 to 87 million buyers, 87 million for a Tech 2 logistics cruiser. That's kind of crazy. Then we get the Purifier, super flat, above 15, 16 to 15. So yeah, that's not going anywhere. Whereas the Rook is doing another 1 year low point for a recon ship. 116 to 113 million ISK. Again, started the year at 250, high point probably 260 to 70, and is currently selling a little bit over 100 million ISK. Definitely an opportunity. What's its bonuses for? ECM, heavy missiles, and I think I checked it last time as well, but it's got drones. It's got 5 small drones. Definitely has some PvE potential as well, I would say. Saber heading for 40 million, not yet a low point, but again the pressure is clear. Then we've got the Scalpel going below 15. Below 15 for the sellers, 14.5, and then 13.4 for the buyers. Super cheap as well. Logistics Frigate, Scimitar, there we go, back above 130, so maybe slightly tradable as well. 50 a day. Try to buy close to 100, 113 for the buyers for instance, 130 then for the sellers. There's maybe a little bit of trading to be done in that, and it's actually a decent volume as well. Then we get the Sleipnir, 1 year low point, 260 to 237 for a command ship. Again, started the year at 500 million. And then the Vagabond, not a 1 year low point just yet, but back below 150, 143 to 132. And then the Zarmast is landing on 500 million ISK. Also relatively cheap, but not yet a 1 year low point, so not as good a spot to try and grab one, I think, as the Ichthyrsa. And as I've said, if you're looking to trade this, I would go small, right? Hound looks good, and then there was another one, like, no, it was not the Kirin, but another one of those smaller ships that looked somewhat interesting, being at 1 year low points and at least still having some volumes to move your trade. But I wouldn't go too big either. Don't buy 10 of them or anything like that. Just go slow, take some small profits, and be careful, because as I've said, those high points do tend to trend down, although I'm clicking on some of them. But yeah, the trend is down, and as I've said, across this Eve talk, I think what's important to note is that activity is very low. I mean, if I fly around the market, do a little bit of exploration, it's super low. I'm alone in a lot of systems, and I think across the board activity is down as well in the monthly economic report. And this is just before the summer, so we could be looking at some really low points over the summer, unless again CCP comes out with some cool stuff. Next up, the Tech Tree ships then coming in at 39.20. Let's see what's happening here. So the Confessor is staying well above 50 million ISKs, very flat actually over the last week at the current range. 55, almost 57, 56 for the sellers, and then 52 for the buyers. New supplies last 48 hours decent, last 24 hours decent. So I think here at least there is a little bit of a consensus price that if you are selling your tactical destroyers at 55 million, it's worth it to invest a little bit of gas in that. Hecate actually going for a high point at 60 million ISK, almost 59.4 for the seller and 55 for the buyers, and starting to take in a little bit of supply as well. Half a page here, probably 30 to 40, maybe even close to 50 ships with those 9s here. So Hecate I think will top here and then edge back to the 55 million. Then we get the Jackdaw, it's actually going below 55 million, interesting, 55 for the sellers. Oh, there it is, 51 for the buyers. Why? Well, 92, 18, that's a lot of them being brought here in the last 24 hours, is clearly putting a little bit of a stop to that, but I think this just gives the Hecate a little bit of room to go back down on supplies towards 55 million. Don't expect the Jackdaw to completely crater because of this supply, because apparently once you go below that 55 million, it's not really too economical anymore from the input costs. And so then we get our Zvepel that was slowly catching up. Well, it's still catching up on the minimum prices, heading towards 50 million, so that's alright. Yeah, 53 million for the sellers now, 49 million for the buyers. A little bit of supply, which you would expect from the least popular tactical destroyer. So I would say that, yeah, it's the lack of popularity that's making it slightly cheaper. But overall, this gap is slowly closing, and if those buyers go above 50 million, I think we could push Zvepel sellers back to 50 as well. So for the tactical destroyers, I think the market is finding the new range considering the gas prices at the moment, and that with a little bit of luck, we'll have correlation again on these, making it more predictable market. But the bad story is, of course, these volumes are really not great, and so making trading happening on such low volumes becomes a far more difficult proposition. Then we get the cruisers. Here is the Legion chart starting to look interesting again for a jumping point, with buyers well below 180, probably below 170 at this point. Yeah, 185 to 168 I would say. Looking at this chart, this could be like one of your final chances to grab a cheap one, because we're starting to go back up as well on the 5-day and the daily moving average. And you see here tops 200, 190 million, buy below 170 or close to 170. I think there is a small trade to be had here. Then we get the Loki is starting to see some pressure as well, with those minimum prices well below 200 million. I would love to see them close to 180. That doesn't happen very often, but you can clearly see here that a 190 should be possible. We're not there yet, although getting close, 205 to 191. 3 more orders and we're below the 190. That would be my trigger to say, yeah, jump in on a Loki and then try to sell well above 200 million. It is clearly possible. Then we get the Proteus. Yeah, not yet, right? Clearly the least popular one, and I'd love to see us be well below 180 before we jump in. 190 to just below 180 or at 179, but yeah, I'd need a little bit more range here on the downside before trying to jump in on that one. And then the Tengu also going down substantially with, well, data points, look at that, getting close to 180. So we get 190 for the sellers, 180 for the first buyer, and then 170. Now I think a 180 Tengu is possible, and it's also potentially something to look into if you're looking for an investment, because selling well above 190, close to 200 is definitely possible. So yeah, to our surprise, a year ago I don't think anyone would have expected that we're actually looking at doing our trading in Tech Tree cruisers, but that's where I would put my money at the moment. I think the fact that we don't lose those skill points anymore has turned this around enough that it's a more stable, more logical market, no longer that easy to manipulate. And as a result, this week, pressure across all of them. And I think the Loki and the Tengu are very close to being the right spot to buy. No, the Legion, excuse me, and the Tengu. And I think for the Loki and the Proteus, just keep an eye on those. If that minimum trend continues to go down here for the Proteus, you got a chance. Loki, yeah, maybe, right? It's still going down on the daily average as well. So very interesting. We will, of course, see how that evolves as well, because perhaps lower demand due to the summer slump can be a reality here as well. And then for our extra products for the week, a request, someone wanted me to take a look at mining ships last week, so we will do that coming in at 44.30. Let's go. So that's for ships, and then we've got mining barges first. Let's start with the Tech 1. I think it's the mining barges, and here we go. The Coveter. That's a pretty flat chart or terrible chart, maybe with like some data points, going for 45 million, up slightly over the last month or so after the spike right here in March. I would say still quite expensive. 46 million for the sellers and 42 million for the buyers. Let's see what the Procure is doing. Also a very bad chart with some of these min-max problems. A little bit less popular, going now for probably 40 to 35 or something like that. It's actually 40 million to 38, 36 million for most buyers. So a little bit less expensive, a little bit less popular. And then we get the Retriever. Very annoying with the charts, but alright. Going for above 45 million, 49 million for the sellers, 43 million for the buyers. I think here, yeah, you've got the Coveter that's a little bit more expensive at the moment, because it's gonna be your highest yield for Tech 1, and that's gonna be part of the group gameplay. But for the solo miners, it's gonna be Retrievers if you're sticking to Tech 1, making that one almost 50 million. Let's see if that is indeed mirrored. And then in this one, so the Hulk, highest yield, actually, oh yeah, it's Tech 2, so it's not gonna be very expensive. Starts here at 300 million, ends the year below 200 million, 185 in fact for the sellers, 173 for the buyers. I hadn't thought about that. Maybe the one that's the exception is gonna be the Machina for solo players, but no, that one, look at that, also well below 200 million at this point, 175 to 151. And then finally the Skiff for protection, yeah, also very down, 120 to 112 million. So if you want to do the jump from Tech 1 to Tech 2, this is clearly the time to do so. You're only like 50, 60, 70% more expensive than the Tech 1 ship. Things used to be quite different. You can see that here, for instance, with the Skiff starting the year at 300 million, is losing 2/3 of its price. Machina at a high point was 400 million, so in half a year lost 50% of that price as well. And then the Hulk is usually 300 million, 250 to 300, and is currently going for a 185. So even your highest yield ship is still decently affordable. So cheap Tech 2, relatively expensive Tech 1 mining barges at the moment. And then we still have our Porpoise. Let's see what that one's doing. Actually holding on quite nicely. It is Tech 1, of course, so above 100 million, probably just 103 million to 93 million. Honestly, then you've got a choice between a Porpoise, unless you're playing in a group and you have something for the boost. Yeah, just go for your Machina at this point. But yeah, 100 million right here for the Porpoise, decently stable. And then we get the Orca. Let's take a look at that one. Going back up slightly, staying at 1.5 billion, 1.7 for the sellers, 1.6 billion for the buyers, so still not below 1.5 billion. Relatively stable here yet again, which is interesting, I would say, because of course with the changes to mining, which I think happened in December, their role has changed. Their solo mining capability has gone down substantially, but they have become boosters. But I think with the double availability, groups realize that, yeah, mining with more players, having an Orca boost a number of Hulks or Machinas or things like that is the way to go in the new meta, and that means there is still enough demand to keep these prices relatively high. Tech 1 is still relatively high in general, especially the larger ships, and then Tech 2 is becoming more and more affordable. So pretty interesting. I don't think I can show you what's it called, by the way. Man, did I really forget our largest mining ship? Let's see if I can find it here. There it is, the Rorqual. Oh, well, it does give us a little bit of an indication, although I think these data points will not be all too representative, which is that the king of mining, of course, by far the largest yield in the game, that's been nerfed substantially here in December, lost a lot of ground, started the year at above 5 billion and is currently on this chart at least going for around 3 billion ISK. So the Tech 1 ship, relatively Tech 1, but you know, not really costing Tech 2 materials, that has lost ground is the Rorqual, with all the others able to really defend their ranges, and it's in Tech 2 that the good deals are to be made at the moment. So yeah, there you go. That was a look at the mining ships for this week as well. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.